All right, Dennis Shanahan will join us as he does every Monday in a moment. But as I mentioned at the top there, no simple story to be told from Saturday's by-election result. So let's get a breakdown as it stands and what it might mean for the federal election from our own election analyst, Tom Connell.
We all know what happened in this Dunkley by-election. Let's delve behind some of these numbers though. Two-party preferred, we know the overall swing, 3.6%. That could tick up a little bit through the postals that are still coming in, but it's going to be in the order of 3.6, maybe closer to 4. It won't quite get there. Where did it swing is another question that we need to look at as well. Let's have a look at some of the booths. The big one, the early one of the night that got a lot of people excited was Mount Eliza North. As you can see, it's not a particularly large booth. We're seeing a few hundred votes. Huge swing on the primary, but this basically got the Liberal Party back to the primary they had 2 elections ago. In other words, this is their heartland, and it proved to be again. This is one of the wealthier areas, so 10.25% two-party preferred. If that was replicated across the electorate, they would have won it easily. The problem was for them, it was not. So then we look at Langwarrin and Central. This is more around the blue-collar sort of heartland vote the Liberal Party want to pick up around the country. If they're going to get these outer suburban seats, goes straight to the two-party preferred. A smaller swing, but still pretty decent at 4.47%. So some encouragement there. The big area spoken about before the election, though, was Carrum Downs, and this one held up pretty well for Labor. This is where the suburban, outer suburban strategy from the Liberal Party will be a little bit of a concern because as we go to the primary here, you see crucially Labor's primary vote is holding right up. There is a decent swing towards the Liberal Party, but given where the rest of the vote washes out, you come up ultimately with a much smaller swing of 1.71% in quite a big booth. So this will be the concern for the Liberal Party. Some of the more blue-collar working class areas didn't actually swing as hard for them. It was more their traditional wealth areas that helped them out. As for what all this means for the next election, of course, you don't assume what happens in a by-election does at the next one, but if it were to, you can see the sort of seats that are in danger. These are outer suburban or regional seats, all with margins lower than that swing we've seen on the weekend. Remember, that's about 3.6, perhaps a little bit higher. These ones become a bit more of a reach. But if the Liberal Party thinks it can get an outsized swing in the suburbs, in the regions, these are other ones they'll be looking at as well. For now, they didn't get quite the swing they wanted, but something approaching 4% at least gives them some hope. We don't assume the same thing happens in by-elections, but it will mean a few of these seats are in their hunting grounds. And note as well how many of these are from New South Wales. We might see plenty of visits there on the election campaign.
All right, joining me now for more. National Editor of The Australian, Dennis Shanahan. We'll start with Dunkley there. I'm saying it could be close to 4. I spoke to people today about the postals, how they're falling out and other. Issue, of course, there, and you can see with a 78% turnout number, it was always going to be turnout, Dennis, and that's lower than expected. Certainly it is low for a by-election. Harder in a metro market to get the message out, of course. But I've got to say sometimes I'm listening to the analysis yesterday and again today, and I must be, I must be a different sort of political analyst because of course the Liberal Party wanted to win the seat, but a 4% swing, if that's where it lands, a 4% swing against a first-term government where the incumbent died, didn't quit and retire in disgrace, and in Victoria, I would be pleased enough, I'd have to say, because I think that is a good foundation for the Liberal coalition at the next election.
Well, Peter, I think the result, and it'll be 3.5% to 4% in the end, and I think that's actually a reasonable result for both sides. Certainly, Peter Dutton can take comfort from this. The circumstances of the by-election certainly weren't in favour of the coalition, and you really, or despite the swing to the Liberals, there was never a real chance that they would win the seat. It was always the most unlikely result. So to say, oh, well, they didn't win, therefore Peter Dutton's in trouble, is clearly a nonsense. On the other side, the government was very nervous about this seat. We saw the amount of time Anthony Albanese spent in the seat, the amount of money Labor spent on the by-election, because it had become a virtual referendum on the tax cuts and on Anthony Albanese's leadership. Now, I think in the end, and we also have to be careful here not to put too much on what this means for the next election, either generally or within Dunkley, because there were a lot of changes there on voting, and there's a redistribution in Victoria. So I think that what we need to do is look at the result and say, OK, this gives grounds for Peter Dutton to work with. As long as he maintains unity and gets some more policy out there, he will continue to get that base back. And for Anthony Albanese, he still hasn't got a bump out of $105 billion in tax cuts, but he has actually maintained the Labor vote. So I think both leaders have actually come away with something that they can say, this is good. What they do in the future is going to be the key. Anthony Albanese has to take the message and change direction, and Peter Dutton has to double down on being unified and producing better policy.
I'll just underscore that point you made there about the redistribution because it's absolutely accurate. The Libs have never won that seat of Dunkley on those existing boundaries, first point. Secondly, Victoria will lose a seat, so there'll be quite a consolidation in the metro market. So, depending on what moves, if anything moves out of Dunkley, that seat will be dramatically different at the next election. And of course, now it goes from a 6.3% seat down to something like 2 and a bit, 2.5 at best. And 2.5 is an absolute hunting ground territory, and there's plenty of them around the country. So I would see that this gives the Libs heart, but it's also a warning bell with sufficient time to change things for Labor to get back to, tin tax, get back to traditional base and deal with some of those issues that are hurting them in that lower income belt in some of these outer regional seats and metropolitan seats. Let's go just on that vein to ASEAN, because we've got all the leaders here, 9 Southeast Asian leaders in Australia, in Melbourne for 3 days. Of course, there's been $260 million on the table for a whole lot of development and security programs in the region. We heard last week from ASIO Chief Mike Burgess about an MP, since left the parliament, involved, he says, in selling out Australia. He didn't name the country at the time. I think we all know what country it was. The Age today named that country as China, so no surprises there. But I've got to say, the rest of the world seems to be a lot more upfront about dealing and confronting with the challenge of China. Certainly in the US, they name China. We did a few years back, but we seem to get pretty shy now. What's that about, Dennis?
Oh, well, look, I think that there's been real pressure put on Australia from China, no doubt about it. Trade pressure, political pressure, security pressure, and of course spying and cyber warfare. So I think that there's a reasonable reason to treat China with respect, that is the respect of someone who can do you great damage. But I think that what we have to ensure is that, like Scott Morrison, we have to actually say China is a threat to regional security. And we have to make that clear, and then we negotiate on trade. Now, I think that the current Trade Minister, Don Farrell, has been doing quite a good job on the trade side of things. I think that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister have needed to do a bit more about threats from China, particularly that damaging incident where Australian sailors were put at risk by a Chinese warship. We need to stand up when they do something and not worry about the trade side. We have to be able to do both things at once.
I wrote in my column over the weekend, this is going back to the whole issue of those ASIO chief remarks last week. There was a lot of chatter amongst the media. Who was this politician? And there was the guessing game going on. But I'd have to tell you, for me, the real headline in that terror update or national security update from Mike Burgess was this genuine threat of Islamist terror here in Australia. He used the frame of words, realistic possibility of a terror attack or terror attack planning, and he names a period within the next 12 months. Now, I would have thought the government would have done a lot more last week to address this issue and reassure the community.
Well, as you can see there from the headline in The Australian, we actually agreed with you, Peter, that we thought that the real story out of the annual threat assessment from ASIO was the fact that the head of ASIO was saying within 12 months there was a realistic chance of a terror attack or terror planning being disclosed by Islamicists in Australia. And he said that wasn't a negligible threat. So I think that was the real threat. I think Mike Burgess made a mistake in throwing in this historic Chinese, although that he wouldn't even say it was Chinese, threat from before. And I think that the real issue, and obviously this is what ASIO thinks, the real threat is from the potential for Islamicist terror in Australia to our citizens. The historic attitude of a former MP really didn't come to the point, and I think it was a distraction.
Well, I agree with you there, Dennis. I'll leave it there tonight. Thank you for your time.